Hey guys, this is God of Politics. Welcome to a brand new video, but before we get started with this video, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Also follow me on Twitter and join the Discord. Those are both linked down in the description. But in today's video, I'm going to be talking about the future of the state of Texas. Is the state of Texas a state that's going to trend towards the Democrats in the next couple of years and eventually flip with its 41 electoral votes that it's going to have? Or is it a state that's going to revert back to being a safe Republican state, a state where Republicans dominate the suburbs, dominate the rural areas, and overall have a very strong showing in the state of Texas? And so there's a number of factors we have to consider, and I think that starts back in 2012 when you can see here Mitt Romney won the state by 15.8 percentage points. And you can tell that he did quite well in the rural areas, obviously not as well as President Trump did, and you can tell that because, we look at these shifts. You can see many of these rural areas, most of these rural areas in 2016 trended towards Donald Trump, and in 2020, a lot of them continue to trend towards Donald Trump, especially a lot of these areas in southern Texas, as well as the areas in western Texas, those areas with generally high amount of Latino populations. But we can see here that Mitt Romney generally did quite well in the rural areas, but the main area where he got a lot of his votes was the suburbs with hundreds of thousands of votes, and Mitt Romney netting hundreds of thousands of votes, netting almost 100,000 in Tarrant, netting almost 100,000 in Collin, netting over 100,000 in Montgomery, netting a good amount in a lot of these suburban counties. And these are the counties where Mitt Romney did very well nationwide, and you can see the same thing in Georgia. You can see the same thing in states like Pennsylvania. He won Chester County by 0.5 percentage points. You can see the same thing in Arizona or California, or generally just anywhere, really, is that Mitt Romney performed quite well in the suburbs, and so did most Republicans. But when you had Trump come along, the Republicans started doing worse in the suburban areas. Of course, in 2016, it was mainly just a problem with Trump. The down-ballot Republicans generally did quite well in these suburban districts. You can look at Texas's 32nd district, for example, a suburban district in the Dallas area, which flipped in 2018. In 2016, that race didn't even have a Democratic candidate. That is how red the suburbs still were, at least in these down-ballot races. But in 2018, a lot of that changed, and a lot of these down-ballot races started shifting more to the Democrats. And you had a very close race in Texas, which was the 2018 Senate race, which was decided by about 2.6 percentage points, I believe. And that was fueled by a very strong showing by Beto O'Rourke in the suburbs, as well as a strong showing by him in the Rio Grande Valley. I believe better than Hillary Clinton, if I'm recalling that correctly. So he had a very strong performance, doing about 7 points better than Hillary Clinton, but he just fell short of winning that race. But there's a number of things we have to consider, and that is how I just talked about. Mitt Romney performed a lot better in the suburbs. Trump lost ground in the suburbs, and despite the ground that he gained in the rural areas, and despite the ground that he gained in the Rio Grande Valley, he has still lost ground overall. In 2016, he won the state by 9 percentage points. In 2020, he won the state by 5.6 percentage points, and that really shows you that most of this population and the votes are coming from these suburban areas. If we look at the size of the lead, we can see that, really out west here and down in the south here, nobody's really netting very many votes. But if you look at these counties, the immediate urban areas and the areas surrounding it, that's where the votes come from. You look at the areas surrounding Dallas, Republicans are still netting a solid amount of votes, and the areas where they net the most amount of votes is Montgomery County, where they're still netting over 100,000 votes, despite the fact that this county did trend 7 points towards Joe Biden. You also have the areas around San Antonio and Austin, and those are areas where Republicans are netting votes, and that's how they win the state of Texas. But if we go back to 2012, we can see that Republicans used to net a lot more. You can see they netted about as much in these Dallas suburbs as Obama did in the Dallas County itself. And Obama barely even won Harris County. He didn't win Bexar County by very much, and he won Travis County by a decent amount, but not by much when you compare it to Joe Biden, who won it by almost 50 percentage points, whereas Barack Obama only won it by 24 percentage points. So you've seen very monumental shifts really in these areas, but that has not been, it's not all been bad news for Republicans, because of course one of the most crazy parts of the 2020 election really was the shifts that we saw in the South Texas area. These shifts of 55 points in areas like Starr County, 38 points in Zapata County, first time it's flipped since 1912. So Republicans had a very strong showing here down in South Texas. So you can attribute that to a number of things. You can say Democrats didn't have on-the-ground operations due to COVID. They didn't really have outreach to a lot of these areas, but you're generally more remote. It's harder to get to a lot of these areas in South Texas than it is to just go to Austin, Houston, Dallas, which is the areas that they gain in the most. But you can also just attribute it to a nationwide shifting right of the Latino vote. You saw the same thing in Miami-Dade County, where you had a double-digit shift to the Republican Party. And you saw the same thing in Osceola County, where you had a double-digit shift. You saw the same thing in Imperial County, California. You saw the same thing in the Bronx up in New York. And so you saw this shift nationwide with Latino voters. And so if you're a Republican in Texas and you're thinking, how can we keep the state of Texas? Well, in part, you want to keep gaining with Latino voters. It really cannot hurt. I mean, of course, like I pointed out, you're not really netting too many votes from the Rio Grande Valley, and these counties, a lot of them are quite small despite having huge shifts. Even though they have huge shifts, they're small counties, but it's better to gain with them than to not gain with them. But what I will say is that really what decides the state of Texas is ultimately going to come down to these suburban counties, because these are huge shifts. And like I pointed out, despite the huge shifts to the right you saw in these South Texas areas, it was overcome by, smaller shifts comparatively in the Dallas suburbs, in the San Antonio and Austin suburbs, and in the Houston suburbs. They were overcome by that, and that is because of the population that exists in these areas, which has grown very rapidly recently. We can look at the growth in population of this decade, and we can see, generally rural areas have lost a decent amount of population, and they haven't lost too much. I mean, in some areas they have areas like West Virginia, areas in the Midwest, but generally they've lost a decent amount of population, but not too much. But we are seeing a lot of population gains in urban areas. Of course, Florida is growing very fast. The Atlanta metro area, the DC metro area, the Denver metro area, the Bay Area, the Phoenix area. Lots of areas that are gaining in population, and Texas is no exception. I mean, we can see a clear example of this. The Dallas metro area up here gaining a lot in population, the Austin and San Antonio metro area, and the Houston metro area. And population is gaining in the Rio Grande Valley here, and some of these rural areas, but these are smaller counties to begin with generally. Of course, there are exceptions to this, but generally these are smaller counties. So really, what's happening is that these suburban counties are becoming even more important. And you saw this in 2020, where, for example, Dallas County had around just over 900,000 votes. Back in 2012, this county didn't even have 700,000 votes for the two parties. And we can look at Tarrant County. Tarrant County back in 2012 had almost exactly 600,000 votes. In 2020, we look at this county and we can see that it had 820,000 votes. We can look at Denton County. This election had just over 400,000 votes. Back in 2012, this county had, not even 250,000 votes. And so the population growth that we're seeing in these counties has led to an increase in votes, and it's gained for the Democrats. And, you can say, if Trump leaves, the Republicans will do better in the suburbs. Even if you had a perfect candidate for the suburbs for the Republicans in 2016 and 2020, these counties still would have shifted to the left, because you have people moving in from generally bluer states like California. That's the typical example, people moving from California to Texas, moving the state to the left. But that really does have a lot of truth to it. People are moving to the state. There's a lot of job opportunities, there's lower taxes, and it is encouraging people to move to the state. A lot of businesses moving to the state as well. And that's what's fueling the population growth, and it is moving generally more Democratic voters to the state of Texas. And so, like I say, you can revert the suburban shifts, and that'll help you over time. But really, you can't just kick the can down the road and expect that you're eventually going to gain with these voters. And eventually, you need to gain with them as soon as possible. And while I do think that the Republicans will make a gains in the suburbs once Trump is gone, because Trump was clearly the most toxic figure the Republicans had, or at least the most toxic, name brand, well-known figure for most voters, for the suburban voters. And once Trump is gone, I think people are going to be much more willing to vote for a Republican in the suburbs. Republicans down ballot in the suburbs still did perform better than Trump, even in the 2020 election. So I think you'll have a trend like that probably continue. So there's a lot of things to consider, because part of the reason we saw these shifts in the suburbs is because of the education demographics. And this is percent of people with a bachelor's degree or higher of age 25 plus. And you can clearly see again where these metro areas are: Dallas metro, Austin Metro, San Antonio Metro, Houston Metro, and these areas generally along the Rio Grande Valley have lower rates of education. You see generally most of the rural areas have lower rates of education as well, and that is in part why they are more Republican. And as for the Rio Grande Valley, that's in part why they shifted more to Republicans as well. That's kind of my take for the overarching reason for why Latino areas have trended towards the Republicans, and that's because Latinos are disproportionately not educated voters in terms of having a bachelor's degree, and so a lot of the shifts that we've seen with white voters, white working class voters without a college degree, are shifting towards the right. You're seeing a similar thing with Latinos without a college degree shifting towards the right, whereas you're seeing white voters with a college degree shifting towards the left. Now, will these trends reverse when Trump is gone, or if you get a better Democratic candidate for Latinos? Maybe they could, but we're going to work off the assumption that they don't. And if those trends continue, well, Texas is going to become a blue state, and that is why it's crucial for Republicans to work to reverse these trends. And that's why, if you're a Republican, you have to think, well, do we want Trump in our party? Do we want someone like him who has caused us to lose states like Arizona and Georgia, to lose even Texas as well? Because it gets very difficult to win the overall election if you lose the state of Texas. If you lose the state of Texas, even if you win Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Minnesota even, and, throw in Nevada and Arizona to that list, Biden still wins the election, winning all of these states but losing Texas. And this is not accounting for the electoral vote changes. I was just showing the 2020 map, but Texas is a very, very crucial state, and it's gaining electoral votes, gaining population, gaining congressional districts. Republicans need to keep hold of it, and I would say that they will in the future, or at least for the foreseeable future. I think in 2024, maybe if Trump's a nominee, Democrats should make a play for it, but I don't think it's going to flip. In 2028, if they keep going down the path of Trumpism, maybe it flips then, but I would still have my reservations about that. But if the Republican Party can shift and kind of revert back to what it was before the Mitt Romney-style party, they're going to certainly do a lot better in Texas. I don't really have much doubt about that. And that's why I'm overall saying Texas is a blue trending state, but I don't think it's a state that's going to flip anytime soon. I expect the suburban areas to at least have somewhat of a reversion towards the Republican Party. I think that Latinos may keep trending towards the Republican Party. In 2022, I think Republicans can have strong successes if they can get their act together with this party division. And overall, I think the Republicans could be in a pretty strong position in the state of Texas. But again, they've got to get their act together, reverse the trends that we're seeing. Otherwise, they could have a similar situation to what happened to California in the 80s. They could have a similar situation to what's happening in Arizona and Georgia now. And I really don't think that Republicans want that to happen. But thank you all for watching this video. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Also follow me on Twitter and join the Discord. Those are both linked down in the description. But again, guys, thank you all for watching this video, and I will see you guys later.